If you've been in the Black Butler fandom for an extended period of time, you may hear the phrase KuroMyu here and there. But what exactly is KuroMyu, and why is it only talked about in hushed voices by extreme fanatics? KuroMyu is the English catch-all term for the stage musical adaptations of Black Butler, a play on Kuroshitsuji and musical, KuroMyu. I've also heard that the Japanese fandom calls them Namashitsuji, which is a play on live butler. Now, you may be asking yourself, why on earth are there musicals for an anime and manga series? Sure, Black Butler has a very dramatic premise that could adapt well to the stage, but it's still a bit odd to think of animes getting stage plays. However, let me share some fun news with you guys. There are a ton of musicals and stage plays based on anime and manga. This genre of musical is specifically referred to as 2.5D musical, kind of like 2D mixed with 3D, so the 2.5, because it takes stories that are traditionally presented in a 2D format and brings them to life on the stage. A little history on the concept here. The first successful manga-based production was a musical adaptation of The Rose of Versailles in 1974. There were many anime musicals and stage skits produced throughout the 90s, and in 2000 there was a Hunter x Hunter play that was considered pretty revolutionary because the voice actors for the original anime also played the characters on stage, which is really cool. These anime musicals rose in popularity in the early 2000s with hits like Prince of Tennis, the musical, which attracted more than 2 million people during its run. And it was actually Black Butler's production value and standards in performing arts that allowed for the 2.5D genre to be brought to a worldwide market. And since 2014, places like China, Taiwan, and the US, and parts of Europe have performed some of these awesome anime musicals. Do you all remember the Death Note musical songs that start trending every now and then on TikTok over the past couple of years?
Let the corporations make the regulations and hold no one accountable when everything goes wrong. Let the rich and famous get away with murder.
Yeah, that was from the English concept album that was recorded in 2014, and it is like a whole actual stage play that has been performed in Japan. So that's pretty fun. So now that we've established that anime fans have been making really banger musicals for decades now, what does that mean for Black Butler? Well, Black Butler has a number of amazing musicals and some that may not be as amazing. At the time of recording this, there are 6 musicals, 2 of which are original storylines that we'll be taking a look at, and the other 4 are fairly faithful adaptations of different story arcs in the manga. And there were also a couple reruns here and there. A quick overview of the timeline. In 2009, we got the musical That Butler Friendship. This is an original concept, and it ran for a week and a half in the spring of that year in the Sunshine Theater in Ikebukuro, Tokyo. In 2010, just a year later, we got the musical The Most Beautiful Death in the World, 1,000 Souls and a Fallen Reaper. This is also an original concept, and a really good one at that. It's kind of a fan favorite amongst the KuroMyu fans. It originally ran from May 3rd to May 23rd in 2010, and it started at the Akasaka ACT Theater in Akasaka, Tokyo, before traveling to Nagoya and concluding in Osaka. In 2013, 3 years later, we got a rerun of The Most Beautiful Death, in which some of the characters were recast. This one is seen as the lesser version, but is still pretty good in its own right. It ran from May 17th to June 9th in 2013, It also started in Akasaka, Tokyo, before traveling to Imeda Arts Theater in Osaka. In 2014, the very next year, we saw the musical Lycoris That Blazes the Earth, which is an adaptation of the Red Butler / Jack the Ripper arc. It's stunning. It ran in September 2014, starting in Osaka, then traveling to Miyagi, Tokyo, and Fukuoka, Japan. The next year, in 2015, we get a rerun of Lycoris, and most notably, Sebastian is recast. We'll talk about that later. This version is equally, if not more, good than the original run, in my humble opinion. It ran from November to December in 2015 and seems to have ran in all of the same places as the original run. However, this rerun also went abroad for the first and only time ever for KuroMyu. It toured in Shanghai, Beijing, and Shenzhen, China in December of 2015. I'm so sorry to any Chinese people if I've butchered that. I'm not as familiar with how Chinese is pronounced. The next year, in 2016, we got Noah's Ark Circus, which, you guessed it, is an adaptation of the Circus arc. It's got a lot of fun songs. It ran from November 18th through December 18th in 2016, starting in Tokyo Dome City Hall, then traveling to places like Canal City Theater in Fukuoka, Amashin Arcane Hall in Hyogo, and ending in Kariya Cultural Center Main Hall in Aichi, Japan. Again, the very next year, in 2017, we got Tango on the Campaignia. Yes, this is an adaptation of the luxury liner, Book of Atlantic, whatever you want to call it. Many fans speculated that we skipped Book of Murder since the Book of Atlantic movie came out this same year, and it's likely the musical came out to support the movie, or at least to follow the hype for that arc. It is a fan favorite arc, after all. This musical ran from December 31st, 2017 to February 12th, 2018, starting in Akasaka, Tokyo, then traveling to Hyogo, Aichi, Ishikawa, and wrapping up in Fukuoka. Breaking our yearly cycle, 4 years later, in 2021, we got The Secret of the Boarding School, which is an adaptation of the Weston School arc, the public school arc, whatever you want to call it. I personally enjoyed this one. It was produced and performed during the height of the pandemic and social awareness of COVID and COVID precautions, so you can see silly little plastic face guards on the actors, and honestly, I don't think those little pieces of plastic hovering a few inches off of their faces really did a whole lot to protect people from the virus, but I assume the cast and crew had regular testing, so all is well, I think. The show ran from March 5th to April 4th in 2021. It started in Tanozu Galaxy Theater in Shinagawa, Tokyo, then moved to Osaka, taking place in Mel Park Hall, Osaka, and wrapping up in Theater Drama City of the Umeda Arts Theater. And that's the quick overview of the timeline of Black Butler musicals. As of recording this video, this is all of the Black Butler musicals and reruns that have been produced. Honestly, there for a while, we got one pretty much every year, which is pretty wild to me, because even though many of these were adaptations of the manga, someone still had to write all those songs, actually write dialogue for the stage, and all the other things that go into producing a musical. Now that we've taken a look at the overview of the musicals, I wanted to dive into each one, specifically the first two, since they are original content. So if you haven't already, grab a snack, a cup of tea, sit back and relax as I tell you about the tales that played out on the stage. Before the musical actually starts, Abeline is out there hyping the crowd up. He then explains where in canon the musical takes place, right in between these two panels in Volume 5, which is really neat. Anyway, on with the show. I do want to be real, I don't think there is a fully subtitled version of That Butler Friendship on the internet, and I do not understand Japanese, so this plot summary is brought to you by wonderful people on the internet who do understand Japanese, and I will post their link in the description below if you want to go read what they had to say. Anyway, The story goes, Ciel and the gang are busy preparing the Phantom Hive Manor for a ball when 3 new guests appear from Japan. As part of English hospitality, Ciel invites them to the ball. At the party, though, an unwelcome intrusion occurs, and it is the start of the mystery surrounding the Japanese guests, who are also owners of a toy company. Yuki, the president of the company, and his older brother Kai reside at the manor with their servant Kirito, who anxiously awaits to attend the ball. When Sebastian screws up his magic trick at the ball and requests that Yuki and Kai provide entertainment for the guest, Kai suggests that Yuki play his flute. Yuki is hesitant, but agrees. However, as he begins to play, ghost-like creatures appear and wreak havoc on the ball's guest and the manor. In an attempt to save his master, Kirito pulls Yuki out of the commotion, followed by Kai, leaving the servants to fight the creatures and Sebastian along with Ciel in hot pursuit of the strangers. As the servants continue to fight in the manor, Sebastian runs into Grell. We all know who Grell is. She's an iconic Reaper. No need to go into that. Grell does try to detain Sebastian as long as she can and professes her love for Sebastian until she is ultimately defeated and lets slip the fact that Kirito is not human. Sebastian's suspicions now confirmed, he leaves Grell and runs off after Kirito, Yuki, and Kai. Having returned to the manor, Kai arrives to find Kirito, who has vanquished the creatures, and Yuki passed out on the nearby staircase. Out of fear and panic, Kai kills Kirito, only to then be joined by Ciel and Scotland Yard detective Inspector Abeline. Just as Kai is about to explain what happened, Kirito stands up, only to reveal that it was Sebastian in disguise and not Kirito at all. Backed into a corner, Kai unknowingly confesses to other murders committed throughout the city and the fact that Kirito was the one responsible for the death of his and Yuki's parents. With truths coming out left and right, Kirito is revealed to be a demon known as a Keishin, who upon killing Yuki and Kai's parents, ate their eyes as a reward, and the flute that Yuki obtained has the power to call back dead spirits. A little bit of a Modazushi moment here. As Yuki stands in awe of his brother, Kirito tries to explain that while he is only an accomplice in these murders, he does not condone what Kai has done. The play wraps up at Kai's funeral. Aberline's actor has such a wonderful, charming, and silly stage presence, and is the sole reason that I love the character so much. There is a running gag that other characters always mispronounce Aberline's name as Agoline, which is like your jawline, I think, in Japanese. And this makes him upset and extra careful to yell and enunciate his name whenever he says it.
顎のラインシャープアバーライン警部何顎のラインシャープって触んなくていいよ
But the gags don't stop at Aberline. There's lots of cute little gags throughout the play, like the part where the actors move the table and chairs off the stage, or Sebastian fails at being a Gary Stu. I also really enjoy when plays make use of the audience and the space in the theater, so the parts where the cast enter via the crowd or walk out into the crowd are pretty cool to me. There's a lot less music in this play than any of the ones that follow, which is kind of a disappointment, but I get it. Writing music is hard, and this was more of an experimental thing, I think. I will say, due to the lack of music, it was a bit boring overall, but that could also just be because I couldn't actually understand the dialogue, and the subtitle file I did have access to only subtitled the songs for some reason. But the songs, which mostly served to introduce characters from the manga, were pretty fun, and Undertaker's introduction was a whole vibe. And honestly, really funny when you take into consideration that the dancing skeletons feel like they were a reference to the fact that Undertaker does, yes, spoiler alert ahead, reanimate the dead, which I know that's not what they were going for here, especially because in 2009, we did not have this plot point in the manga. It was supposed to just be haha skeletons, Undertaker, dead people, but it's funny how Black Butler keeps accidentally foreshadowing itself. It's really cute. I do want to add real quick, I have read reviews from people who do understand Japanese, and they also say the play was pretty boring, all things considered. So I guess it's good that it's not just my lack of understanding that made me bored. I don't know. First play, it's not going to be a banger. I do think it is interesting that Ciel and Yuki had a bit of a duet moment, placing parallels between the two. Usually a duet like theirs is to show the audience that these two characters aren't that different, even if the characters don't know as they sing together, yet alone. So that was cute and really interesting, in my opinion, for their characters. Because, yes, Yuki and Ciel both own toy companies, they're both orphans with trauma. They do have a lot of similarities, which I think was intentional, just so that the audience could maybe like these new characters. I'm not really sure. Also, not included in the plot summary that I found, Soma and Agni show up for some reason. I'm not really sure why or what's going on here, but I think they're helping. Lao and Ranmao are also there and ready to take on the ghost in the manor. The choreography in this musical is pretty fun, I think. The fight scenes were amusing, and while I do have to say it is definitely the weakest of all the musicals in this whole KuroMyu experience, it's a start, and it was probably a pretty solid start at that. Will I be watching it again? Probably not, unless I learn Japanese and want to see if that makes a difference on how much I enjoy this. As it stands, the musical isn't canon and has not been referenced in the manga or anime, so do what you will with that. The most beautiful death in the world is a banger musical. This is the second musical based around the series, and like the first, is also an original concept. However, this feels more in line with a story that could actually be found in Black Butler. That being said, this is fully subtitled online, so I summarized this myself, which is why it's very long-winded and very much like beat for beat, but it's a good one, so strap in. This musical, as does each one that follows, starts with Ciel in a cage. We see a glimpse of his trauma during that month that he's held captive, and we see the formation of the contract. This opening becomes a staple for Black Butler musicals, and also acts as an introduction to who Ciel and Sebastian are for those in the audience that may not be familiar with the anime or the manga. After Ciel gets his costume change done, we move into the storyline for the musical. Things start fairly simple as Sebastian is getting Ciel ready for the day. This is where we first learn of the strange deaths that have been happening around London. The servants then rush in chasing a rat, mimicking that one chapter in the manga, and of course, Sebastian takes care of it in a comedic way. Mayrin then delivers a letter from the Queen, one that puts Ciel on the case to solve the strange deaths he read about in the paper. The Queen is certain it's a serial killer out on the loose. Ciel isn't convinced, but I mean, if the Queen's ordered it, he's gotta investigate. While Sebastian is reading the letter, actors are acting out the scenario behind them on a lifted part of the stage, which is really cool and adds a lot of, immersion, I think. It gives my brain more to work with than just hearing Sebastian describe what was going on. So that's cool. We are then introduced to the Reapers Society and the two most iconic original characters, Alan Humphreys and Eric Slingby. Alan has noticed that those dying in London were not on the death list. At first, they suspect Grell, but she's quick to defend herself. Man, the actor who plays Grell literally never misses. Anyway, the Reaper song is a certified banger. Alan gets put on the case to figure out what's going on, and Eric volunteers to be his support. And Grell tags along as well because they're going to the Phantom Hive Manor. We then learn that Eric and Alan have a history, and that Alan has an illness that Eric is pretty upset about. And now it's time for my favorite characters and a little bit of a tonal shift, Aberline and Sharps, the comedic duo of the century and the characters that carry Black Butler musicals. That's a bit of a stretch, but they are really fun and I love them a lot. And they're just a great contrast to CL's serious nature as well. Aberline shares that he can't share anything about the case, but due to his tendency to overshare, CL is able to figure out that there doesn't seem to be a motive and that Scotland Yard's investigation hasn't really gone anywhere. Sebastian deduces that these suspicious deaths have been going on for around 6 months, and it seems like the best place for answers would be visiting Undertaker, who doesn't seem to enjoy the joke that Sebastian delivers. Undertaker shares that this time he's yearning for love, to which Sebastian performs a song that seems to do the trick. Happy day for all the Sebastian and Undertaker enjoyers out there, I guess. I've never actually seen anyone who ships that ship, but they're eating well tonight. Undertaker then reveals that the victims died instantly, leaving no trace of pain or fear. Smiling in their death, no external wounds. Undertaker then shares that they weren't killed by human hands, giving CL all he needs to know. This is a case for him and Sebastian. CL orders Sebastian to catch the killer, leading their way into their duet, Black and White. This song will be reprised later, by the way. At the end of the song, Eric and Alan show up and instantly recognize Sebastian. Alan kind of picks a fight, but then suffers some kind of issue due to his illness. Also, Grell is there. She walks in and explains that Alan's suffering basically from a chronic illness that only affects Reapers. It's called the Thorns of Death, and it is fatal. Obviously, Thorns of Death is going to be fatal. Anyway, the illness is basically just thorns sinking into Alan's heart over time. It's considered a curse from the dying and all the souls that he has reaped. Alan is dying from this illness. Sebastian suggests they invite the Reapers back to the manor, and Grell couldn't be happier. The Reapers go with Ciel and Sebastian, hoping that staying with them will aid in the investigation. There's a bit of a transitional song sung by an opera singer, which is pretty cool. The song is basically just about the Thorns of Death and Alan's struggle with it as he slowly dies, which is very thematic. Back at the Phantom Hive Manor, Alan wakes up, seemingly in distress about his situation. An immortal god dying from an illness. He wonders how much time he even has left. Eric tries to be a voice of reason, but Alan feels alone. He expresses that when he'd reap souls, he'd wished he could understand death, and feels that his illness helps him understand, at least a little bit. He's stuck in between life and death. He was born alone, and he'll become ash and bone. Death is inevitable, and that's his fate. Which is pretty interesting, because the musical was written and performed years before Yana Toboso revealed that Reapers were in fact once humans, and becoming a Reaper is basically punishment for suicide. So that kind of negates a lot of Alan's character, but it's still really interesting. Alan continues, complimenting Eric, expressing that he wished he could be like Eric. But Eric expresses that he wished he could be more like Alan, more understanding and empathetic. Eric is a man trodden down with hatred and malice towards death. Almost as if the musical needed to lighten the mood a bit, we swap over to Grell, who is tied up and in Victorian-era lingerie, ready to have a fun night with Sebastian, who I think has already rejected her. But that doesn't stop her from dreaming now, does it? and also singing a little bit of a spicy song, which ends with her running into a very uninterested Sebastian. However, the demon does lead her on, saying he needed her. Silly miscommunication. Grell thinks he's talking about intimacy, but we'll soon find out the truth. As morning falls on the manor, the servants prepare breakfast, which Eric and Alan try to skip out on. However, Sebastian interrupts, accusing Eric of being a murderer. He's gathered 96 instances of evidence. Eric is a little bit flabbergasted, honestly. We then learn that Grell was used in the investigation. A hot night colliding over and over. Sebastian used her to complete his investigation in one night. Despite it not being how Grell describes it, she still seemed like she had fun spending some quality time with him. Sebastian then reveals that there was a particular scent that gave Eric away. His cologne, which was highly unusual and kind of expensive, so it was really easy to narrow that down. However, more damningly, there's the scent of death that surrounds the Reaper. That was the real undeniable evidence. And Eric concedes, saying it'd be foolish to deny any further. He then engages in combat with Sebastian as Alan looks on, desperate for answers. Alan tries to stop Eric, only to be tossed away. Grell, like the chaos gremlin she is, steps in, but her scythe is immediately stolen by Sebastian, who continues the 1v1 with Eric. Sebastian then hits Eric with Grell's scythe, revealing his cinematic record, and thus showing him in the act. Once all has been revealed, Eric runs off and everyone follows, leaving the servants in the difficult predicament of having to figure out if they can eat the food that's been left, just like that one time in the manga and the anime. We see a transitional period of Alan searching for Eric, Aberline and Sharps investigating, and Eric looking on as the Viscount of Druid kidnaps a couple of women. Ciel and Sebastian hear the screams of Viscount's victims, and Ciel assumes it's due to Eric. However, Sebastian reminds him that it probably had nothing to do with Eric because Undertaker has previously told them that Eric's victims died instantly with no pain or fear, so it's unlikely that the scream was due to anything Eric had done. Viscount of Druid has a scene where he's talking about his motives for kidnapping, sacrificing beauty to atone for the sin of being pretty. This is really the opposite of pretty privilege. The musical really leans into how unhinged and creepy the Viscount's character is, which is really refreshing. The Viscount terrorizes the women he kidnapped, threatening them into chirping like birds and being cute and essentially worshipping him. He performs a song about it. It's a little bit of a banger, but the women are still terrified, rightfully so. Eric then shows up, taking pity on the women, saying it's not right. He then cuts the ropes that bind them and goes into a song about how he doesn't care what this does to him, what sins he wallows in. He wants to help Alan, and he will remain strong for Alan. It's more or less a song about his grief for Alan and his situation. So that's real sad. Also, yes, during all of this, the Viscount is still torturing the women in the background. Throughout Eric's song, you can just hear that whip hitting the stage, and it's like, bro, time and place, my guy. Anyway, Eric ends up killing the women to ultimately set them free, and also add to his goal of, if you haven't guessed it by now, collecting 1,000 souls, but we'll talk about that in a second. The Viscount then figures out that Eric is the real serial killer, and is amazed at how beautiful the corpses are. He's very inspired, for lack of a better word. Alan does finally catch up with Eric, though. calling his actions cruel, but as he talks, he figures out why Eric is collecting all of these souls. But Eric won't confirm. Alan vows not to let things end this way until he hears Eric's explanation. They scuffle until Alan has another Thorns of Death attack. Eric escapes again, but now we know that he is acquainted with the Viscount, so, I mean, that might be important later. We then get several mini scenes of the Reapers, Scotland Yard, and Ciel's gang as they all figure out when, where, why, how, but mostly where this whole thing is going to come to a climax. The Viscount has put on some sort of event to help Eric achieve his goal. An opera limited to only women and children. The location?
Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace. Sebastian. Checkmate. Crystal Palace.
This leads into Checkmate, the big number of the whole show. The reprise of Black and White, the moment Ciel orders Sebastian to kill Eric. This is the culmination of everything thus far, and the ending of Act 1. Act 2 opens on the recreation of the corset scene. I've already discussed my thoughts and feelings on this scene in my video on the Red Butler arc, so if you're really interested, you could go watch that. But the quick down and dirty is, I think it's weird fan service, and it feels even more misleading and odd when it's acted out on the stage. The scene is drawn out a lot more in the musical as well, and it's just weird because Ciel is played by a real child. So if you think about that too much, then it's odd, you know? Anyway, they really leaned into it feeling like a sexual scene until Grell revealed that it was pretty much just dress up. The lights come on, and we see that Ciel and Grell are dressed up for the opera. Alan is also dressed as a woman, and incredibly transphobic about it, seemingly missing the plan that he was supposed to be Grell's male escort. Sebastian states that it doesn't matter how many women they have in their party, though, so it's fine. However, this does allow for the servants to come as well, since there's now plenty of women for Finny and Bard to accompany one as well. So that was cute. I love that they get to come. Meanwhile, Eric and the Viscount are discussing the opera. Eric then tells a story about how when he was out on his first mission with Alan, their target's garden had purple flowers in bloom. These flowers were called Ericas, but before Eric could share what Alan taught him they meant, the Viscount interrupted. Eric then finds out that the Phantom Hives had received an invitation, but he's not bothered. He'll still aim for his goal despite them being there. We also get a fun scene where we see that Aberline and Sharp both went undercover as women as well, and we also learn that Aberline is completely wrong on who he thinks the culprit is. And the opera begins. Eric waltzes out into the crowd, bold and clear as day. Aberline also recognizes Ciel, which is funny because Ciel would die if he knew that Aberline recognized him. Almost as if a distraction, though, the Viscount interrupts the opera, stating its true intentions. Alan finally confronts Eric, but the King of Deflection instead asks Sebastian why he's serving a human. Honestly, that question should have been asked when they first met, but you know what? You do you, Eric. You do you. They then engage in combat. Sebastian comments on how he finds it strange that Eric is sacrificing everything just for one person. William and Ronald appear on the scene, figuring out that Eric is in fact the culprit. But Alan still needs his answers, and Sebastian was ordered to kill, so he can't really leave it up to the Reaper's dispatch now, can he? And again, wanting to play in the chaos, Grell jumps in. In the chaos, Eric is able to capture Ciel. However, Sebastian is held up by the other Reapers. Bard is helping from the background, though, with his hand cannon. It's a really fun fight scene, honestly. William, however, calls for the fight to be delayed. They've got work to do, and Sebastian does also have to rescue Ciel after all, so it works out. Anyway, Aberline and Sharp are very confused, but continue to bark up the wrong tree, despite all of the answers being right in front of them. Alan, no longer in his pretty dress, catches up to Eric, allowing him to finally talk with Eric. Alan offers his own soul to Eric, but it's revealed that if he did so, it would be pointless. Alan then realizes that Eric is gathering souls to save him. 1,000 pure souls is the alleged cure to the thorns of death. However, it's just a myth, similar to the 1,000 paper cranes myth. Eric is willing to take this risk, however. He'll do anything to save Alan. His eternal life is utter darkness, but Alan gave him a ray of light. Alan doesn't want Eric to kill anymore, but he's willing to break the rules for him, removing his glasses as he references the Rules song from earlier in the musical. Alan states that Eric is still his partner and is willing to leave the dispatch for him. Alan is willing to look past Eric's sins. Eric and Alan leave their glasses behind, symbolizing their rebellion and their self-removal of the dispatch. They're so in love without stating that they're in love. At least I think that's how most of us have interpreted this whole thing. We then move to Ciel being held captive as he orders Sebastian to come and save him. They have a little quarrel that is pretty typical of these two characters, but this scene is also incredibly out of character. Amidst the quarreling, Sebastian convinces Ciel to meow, and he does, which we all know Ciel would rather die, and would never meow for Sebastian, or anyone for that matter, and if this were manga Ciel, he would have just ordered Sebastian to untie him and stop this foolishness. And he does eventually do that in the musical, but not after he plays along, kind of feeding into some silly Sebastiel bait. It's just really out of character. I don't care how you feel about the ship. It's just a really out of character scene. And it's weird. And kind of strange. It's just, the edition, I wouldn't have made this edition. They don't understand these characters like I do. Afterwards, we move on to Eric and Alan. Alan is once again having a Thorns of Death attack, and they seem to be happening more frequently. Before they can leave, though, Sebastian finds them, vowing to kill Eric. Eric's story is more or less told through song, with Sebastian comparing their situations.
エリックさん、あなたはきっと殺しを続ける。哀れな死神、嘘と積み重ねる一つの魂を救うため。
Doing all that for just one soul, whether it's eating it or saving it. Throughout the song, we see Eric killing, collecting more souls, begging for Alan's forgiveness. However, the more he kills, the more death surrounds them. And if Alan rejects all that he's done, then it's meaningless. Eric is drowning in his sins. However, Eric only needs one more soul to achieve his goal. Sebastian then faces Eric head-on, stating if he dies, he'll have his final soul. They fight, but Eric admits that his soul is too tainted. He still needs to find one more pure soul to reach his goal. However, during their fight, Alan steps in to try to save him. And Eric realizes that he could just kill Ciel to gain his final soul. However, Alan steps in and protects Ciel, getting the fatal blow from Eric instead. His cinematic record plays, showing us the scene Eric was talking about earlier with the Viscount. The Erica flowers mean loneliness. Eric doesn't get it at the time. Sure, they're born alone and die alone, but there's always someone blooming right beside them. Eric and Alan finally have their heartfelt duet, revealing that their character songs from before went together to tell a bigger story. A love doomed by the narrative. Eric has gathered his 1,000 souls, but the final soul he collected was the very soul he was trying to save. His efforts rendered meaningless. If Alan died, then why did he kill all those people? Sebastian is there to rub salt in the wound, though, his favorite pastime. Eric can't bring Alan back to life no matter what he does. Their fates are the same, though. They'll be together in death. Eric begs Sebastian to kill him. Sebastian initially doesn't want to, but it was also an order, so he asks Ciel what he should do, and Ciel, of course, says to kill him. So Sebastian grabs Alan's death scythe to deliver the final blow. Eric is conflicted by this, though. It's got a poetic justice to it. And as he dies, Eric falls back onto Alan, their bodies resting in death together. The souls Eric collected rain down on the scene. Everything is painted in a beautiful meaninglessness. The case has come to a close, the souls were collected, and our story here comes to its end. One final scene to close out the musical. Ciel and Sebastian return home, and it's time for bed. Ciel and Sebastian reflect on the events that have happened, and Ciel thinks that Eric and Alan were very foolish. However, he's only a 13-year-old human child. What does he know? Respectfully. Sebastian does have a solo song about his thoughts on it all, the foolishness of day-to-day life, the way humans are trapped within their humanity, the way that fate is inevitable. And Ciel's fate is a grim one. But they're in this together. They're spiraling down together. Honestly, this song could kind of be read as Sebastian bait or with a Sebastian lens, and I'm not really sure if that was intentional. But Matsushita Yuya, the Sebastian actor, also released this song as a single, so that was pretty cool. It's also the only KuroMyu song on Spotify, so that's fun. The musical closes on the reminder that Ciel's soul is the only important one to Sebastian, and that it belongs to him, until the contract is fulfilled and he can devour the soul he's cultivated. That's it. That's the musical. They do curtain calls to the Reaper Dispatch song, which is a slay. Well, it's got different lyrics, thanking people for coming and all that, but it's still pretty fun. And all the actors get to do the fun dance, even Ciel and Sebastian. I'm obsessed with it. Matsushita Yuya did reprise his role as Sebastian, because he was also Sebastian in the first one. And I do have to say, his portrayal of the character has greatly improved from the first musical to this one. But this can also be attributed to the manga being a little bit farther and allowing for a greater understanding of Sebastian's character. I also enjoy that his vocal range, for the most part, falls within my own. Makes my one-man production of the musicals go a little bit more smoothly. Just like Yuya's improvement, this musical was worlds better than the first. The story was stronger overall, and it felt in character for the series, for the most part. The original characters were also more integrated in the world, since the first musical wasn't subtitled and I couldn't get a feel for how well the characters were written in that one. I can't really compare exact points, but Eric and Alan were incredibly well written in my opinion, and their time on stage was utilized very well. We've become invested in their story and attached to their characters in just a couple short hours. Their duet towards the end that combines their character songs is also just beautifully tragic. The costuming and stage design was also just much better, but this could be due to having a bigger budget, perhaps. It's hard to knock one and praise the other, knowing the success of the first is what allowed the second musical to flourish like it did. This production is much larger than the first, with numerous extras populating the stage, making the story feel more alive, and the stage is very dynamic with the different parts and the way that they move things around, whereas in the first musical the stage was very stationary. Anyway, I've loved this musical ever since I first saw it back in 2012. It's got good music and a captivating story. Will I watch it again? I've easily seen this musical 10 times already, so probably. I used to be obsessed with it for many, many years and used to regularly listen to the songs from it that I had downloaded to my old iPod. It was iconic. It was the moment. As it stands, this musical isn't entirely canon, but it has been referenced in the manga, and Eric and Alan have had cameos in Season 2 OVA Will the Reaper's Story, so it's canon enough for me. Eric and Alan are canon characters at this point, more or less. Not exactly, we kind of just... It's a cameo in the manga, but I was very excited about it when I saw it, and that's all that matters to me. It's really good. I'm incredibly biased. Now that we've more or less run through what The Most Beautiful Death in the World is, it is time to talk about the 2013 rerun. The story is the same, so there is no need to rehash that again. Yuya reprises his role as Sebastian, but many other characters were recast, like Ciel, and more importantly, Eric and Alan. Keep in mind, this rerun is 3 years after the original, and it's 3 years of the fandom growing attached to the original and listening to the original actors sing over and over again. So any difference would be felt. However, I feel like the new Eric and Alan were just as good as the original. Yes, there are slight differences in how they portray the characters, but overall it's fairly similar. I will say this new version of Eric did feel less tired and jaded. The original was very worn down by it all, that's for sure. Most importantly though, their duet during Alan's cinematic record scene was bittersweet and hit just as hard for me personally. It was just as good as the original, in my humble opinion. And that is also my favorite part of the entire musical, so if that one's good, I can deal with everything else. It is another thing to note that this 2013 rerun, people kind of mark it as the start of the KuroMyu era that brought us everything else. So it is very influential and important in that regard. It kind of rebooted the KuroMyu franchise, more or less. There are differences in some of the songs throughout the musical, though. For example, the Reaper's Dispatch song has a totally different backing track, which caught me very off guard. And there are some differences just throughout the song in its entirety, but the performances were equally as fun as the original, and I'd like to think that these differences played to the new actors' strengths, like Ronald's rap segment. That's my thoughts, at least. There were many things in the rerun that were virtually the same, though, which, yeah, it's a rerun. It's going to be similar. But it is interesting to see what changed and what stayed the same. Like, why add the dance break in Grell's Rated R song? I mean, it was iconic. But it's also a new addition. It was really cool, though. And it's also cool to see the same scenes and songs performed by some of the same actors 3 years later. Yuya did do some things differently, and while the 2010 performance was great, this rerun kind of shows how much he's grown during that time as a performer, which is always really cool to see. The same could be said for Grell's actor, though. Very iconic. I thought the actor was perfect in the 2010 run, but Grell's portrayal just keeps getting better and better. Overall, I thought the rerun was good in its own right. Will I watch it again? It's possible. Although I'll probably find myself turning to the original since that's the one I'm more familiar with and have been watching all of these years. It's still a really solid performance of a beloved story and worth the watch if you have the chance. It's interesting to me that despite this rerun being pretty good, the KuroMyu fandom considers the 2010 one to be the good one. Although I don't think I think their quality is the same. So that's interesting. We're truly in a new era now. Lycoris that blazes the earth. Since each musical from here on out is just adaptations of the manga, we will not be discussing the story of them. Since I am kind of doing an extensive deep dive series into each story arc of the manga, so if you really need a refresher, you can just watch those instead. Anyway, shameless self-promo. These next sections are going to be lightning fast compared to the previous one. Lycoris That Blazes the Earth is an adaptation of the Red Butler arc, and it's a pretty good adaptation. The stage design is really cool, and it's this musical that marks a heightened production value for the sets. The previous musicals did have decent sets, but Lycoris and all the subsequent musicals after have very intricate and custom-made sets. Like, I'm talking stuff was built for this and not just using like general stage stuff the way that they did in Beautiful Death. They also start making use of projections in really cool ways, which I really enjoyed. And yes, the first musical did have a custom-made stationary set, but it was just like kind of lame in comparison. All it really was like a wall and a staircase. It was probably done the way that it was for budget reasons, and with that in mind, it is really good, but this is much better. One really notable scene that has stuck with me throughout all of these years is Madame Red's cinematic record flashback scene. The use of projections to immerse the audience in her memories was really neat, and allowed for a visual experience that otherwise wouldn't have been doable on stage. The actors also work really well with the projections, too, and it's not like just in the background for the audience, it's a part of the world of the play, and that's a really good integration. And I also just really love the song for this whole scene, and I think the actress absolutely killed it here. She's iconic. I love her so much. In 2015, Lycoris did have a rerun where Sebastian was recast to Furukawa Yuta, who has since become just the actual embodiment of the character, which is really funny because I have heard rumors that allegedly the original Sebastian actor told Yuta that he'd never be as good as he was. Yuya really thought he was that bitch. Anyway, Yana loved Yuta so much in the role that she adjusted Sebastian's character design in the manga to mimic and kind of resemble Yuta Furukawa. Not to pit actors against each other because I did really enjoy the original Sebastian as well, but Yuta does have Yana's blessing essentially. It's clear to see who embodied the character better overall. Ciel's actor, Fukuzaki Nayuda, reprised his role as well, which is like the first time that's ever happened. This is the first time audiences get to see the same Ciel twice, essentially. This role has been recast for every production thus far, probably due to age, since the previous Ciels had all been around 13 to 15, but Nayuda was 12 when he started, meaning he could very easily still play this role the next year for the rerun. In fact, most of the actors reprised their roles for this rerun, and it's the first and only Black Butler musical thus far to perform outside of Japan, which was a major accomplishment. For the most part, this rerun is identical to the original, so there's not much to say about the differences from what I remember. The biggest difference is, in fact, just the different actors for Sebastian. Yuta approaches Sebastian's character with an acute awareness of his monstrous characteristics, whereas Yuya was more comedic and suave in his portrayal. None of these are wrong, it's just different aspects of the same character. Yuta really leans into the fact that Sebastian is a demon and portrays him as such, leaning into the weird creature vibes that Sebastian does have in the manga from time to time. As always, Grell is iconic, but the musical really made me appreciate Madame Red's character in a different way. I absolutely adore the actress who played her. Akane Liv plays Madame Red, and she is absolutely perfect in this role. Her acting is spot on, her singing is amazing, the costuming for the entire musical is great, but hers is stunning. She brings a certain life to the character that feels like a more full version of her than the manga and anime counterparts. The musical is actually my favorite way to consume this story arc. It's also very fun that since the characters are on stage and reacting to things we don't see them react to in the anime or manga, it adds a certain depth to characters like Madame Red that is otherwise lost. She's a human being who has a lot to hide and be worried about, and we can see that in the background as Ciel and Sebastian work on their investigation. It's just such a fun thing that is really unique to this medium. It's a very, very good musical. Will I watch it again? Yeah, absolutely. I've already seen the 2015 rerun several times. Unlike The Most Beautiful Death, most KuroMyu fans consider the rerun to be the better version of the musical. Fans really enjoy Yuta in the role of Sebastian, which, fair and valid, real and true. Both versions are worth it to watch if you have the time and are interested. Noah's Ark Circus. Again, canon, so we're not going to run through the plot. But I was really, really excited for this musical when it came out. I posted about it on my Facebook back in the day when one of my internet friends shared their copy of the musical with me. Anyway, this musical is full of bangers. The music goes hard and has a certain vibe that's so perfect for the circus arc specifically. There's a steampunk vibe to the set and some of the music that is really fun and fits the vibes of the circus arc. I can't really explain it because Black Butler has never really had a steampunk aesthetic to it, but it's adjacent. And there's generally an overlap between steampunk aesthetic and circus vibes, especially when it's a circus from the Victorian era. So it works. The set is also just really fantastic. It's another dynamic set, but it moves a lot more than any set we've seen previously, and the way they integrate that into how they tell the story is so cool. It makes the stage feel bigger than it actually is, which I think was part of the point. This is not a criticism towards previous Ciel actors. I think they all did really well, but I think the actor who took over Ciel for this musical and the following one is the best Ciel actor they have ever had, including future ones. We'll talk about that later. Uchikawa Reo did such a good job portraying the character, and he's also very expressive on stage. He's a wonderful actor. But he also did have the advantage of more manga to refer to when trying to understand Ciel's character. I'm not sure if that's what he did. The musical did come out in 2016, and at that point, the manga was in the Blue Sect arc, meaning most of the characterization that we refer to for Ciel's character has already happened in the manga at this point. I kind of hope though, I don't know if Ryo read the manga before taking this role since he was 12, and I'm not entirely sure if I think Black Butler is appropriate for a 12-year-old to read, but the resources were there, and at the very least, someone else could have relayed the characterization to him. I'm not really sure. He understands Ciel the way I do. Maybe I'm biased because I know there are different readings you could take of this character and all are equally valid. I just really like the way Ryo portrayed Ciel. I thought it was spot on. The comedy was also really on point. Aberline and Sharps, as always, is my favorite duo, and the scene where they go to confront Undertaker was just such a delight. The introduction to the circus was also really cool. The song was fun, but it still had a dark undertone that's very fitting for this arc. As I said earlier, the set is dynamic and it works really well for what they're trying to do. The chorus, or extras, however you want to refer to them, were also dressed up like circus performers, which made the circus feel much more alive than the original. Yes, we see in the anime and manga that there are many members of the circus, but they're not a part of the performances. So they're just kind of like there behind the scenes, whereas in the musical, the performances are given to us in a song, and in a way, these supporting cast members are a part of the performance, and it works really well. It makes it feel alive in a way that I love. Just like the anime, the musical adds a scene where we get to see the first string members kidnap children. This isn't in the manga and is added material, but it's so cool. The gist of it is that the members perform, enticing kids to follow them away. It is very reminiscent of the Pied the Piper legend that heavily gets referenced heavily in the story arc. So that was really fun. I did enjoy that a lot. Not that I like seeing children get kidnapped, but I like what it adds, you know? Because in the manga, it doesn't really show us what they do to kidnap these kids. And I don't know if we're supposed to just infer based on the fact that they are referencing Pied the Piper, or if it was just not really like something you're supposed to think about. I don't know. I just think it adds a lot to the reference that is already being made. Also, Baron Kelvin's portrayal on the stage was so good. Bone-chilling and menacing. His actor did so well. He really took the opportunity to just be unhinged, and I respect that. I also think it's really interesting that Joker's actor leaned more into the fear that his character felt. In the manga, Joker's character is a bit more to himself with what he's feeling, unless he feels that others are in danger, and then he kind of is more outward with his thoughts and feelings. So I found this outwardly afraid portrayal to be pretty interesting, and it goes a long way to make Joker sympathetic to the audiences. The musical is a fairly faithful adaptation, and what it adds fits well within the framework. And what it omits due to time constraints, or because it wouldn't have worked well on stage, doesn't take away from the story, in my opinion. It's kind of perfect. I think I'd have to say it's my favorite out of all the canon musicals. The music is definitely my favorite, I think. There are some points where it sounds a little off, but I think that may be due to some of the voices just not blending well together, because when they sing on their own, they sound fine. I will say, though, the inclusion of Sally Knight did not make a lot of sense. But it was really fun, so I'm not gonna complain. Would I watch this again? Oh, absolutely. I have that brain rot, I guess. I got that dog in me, you know? I mean, clearly. Why else would I have made so many videos about Black Butler and continue to do so? This musical was more of a spectacle than all the previous ones, and I think that works really well for the story it set out to tell. The circus arc is a spectacle in and of itself, after all. Tango on the Campaignia. Such a good title for the musical. The title, banger, perfect title, I love it. This musical did come out in 2017, seeming to coincide with the movie, which came out earlier that year. They were really giving fans of this arc a whole buffet that year. This is an adaptation of the luxury liner / Book of Atlantic story arc, the Titanic one, if you will, whatever you want to call it. And I say it's a pretty good adaptation.
まもなく橋を発します。やっべ。はいはい、乗ります。これに遅れたらマジ殺されるっつーの。
Yes, while some things are changed around, like the addition of Aberline and Sharps being on the cruise, they act as a way to fill in any gaps that have been left by adapting this to the stage. For example, in the manga, at the very start of the arc, we're introduced or reintroduced to Ronald Knox in a more official capacity that really shows his character. We see how he flirts with a random woman, stating that he hopes to see her again if they don't die, showing us his light-hearted yet cynical nature. However, in the musical adaptation, Ronald spends some time with Aberline and Sharps on the cruise, and it's really cute and fun, and this scene ends up mimicking that scene from the manga, and it serves to reintroduce his character in the same way to the musical audiences. Also, musical Aberline and Sharps are just so iconic, and I think they're staples of the KuroMyu franchise. Furukawa Yuta and Uchikawa Reo reprised their roles as Sebastian and Ciel, and as always, they do such a great job. Reo does a wonderful job in his portrayal of Ciel, and I think he really taps into the tenderness behind the mask of this character. Yes, Ciel is a brat, and Reo knows when to play that up, especially in the flashback portion of this arc, which is really cool.
私は執事、あなたは伯爵。まだまだ未熟で足りない経験。陰気、生意気。あなたと私はまだ一人の子供と一匹の悪魔。
It's a really good scene. But at the same time, he is incredibly tender with Lizzie, and through his portrayal, we see a boy with a big heart who cares a lot about his family. Something that I think people tend to overlook with Ciel's character. Tango on the Campaignia is a really good musical, although the musical itself isn't my favorite. Would I watch it again? Absolutely. The actors do such a good job in breathing new life into this story arc and the characters. It was also really cool finally getting to see the Midford family on stage, and they were iconic. Loved them. I especially liked how Lizzie was portrayed. The balance between her desire to be cute and the woman she thinks Ciel wants, and her strong nature and aptitude. Lizzie is an incredibly complex character, and her complexities tend to take a backstage to the story and the fandom, let's be real. So, of course, like all Lizzie stans, I really loved her sword fighting scene.
こんな可愛くない姿、絶対にシエヌにだけは見せたくなかった。
I think the actress did a really good job balancing all the different aspects of this character, and I just thought it was nice. Her song is really good. I like it.
お嫁さんって何でできてる？ふわふわドレス、ブーブー系にレース。
She's cute. She's more than cute. Another particularly noteworthy scene that I wanted to talk about is the part where we see Sebastian's cinematic record.
弱くて脆いけれど、人の命を引きずるのは結構大変なんだよ、執事君。前から興味あったんだよね。害獣風情がなぜおしくせで執事なんかやってるのか。見せてもらうよ。君のレコード。
セバスチャン！
and we actually get flashbacks on his early life with Ciel. The way that those two grew into who they are now, and the way that he had to learn, essentially, how to be a human and a butler. I loved seeing how those two actors chose to portray the dynamic. It was incredibly engaging, and the use of projections to fill the time to allow for certain things like costume changes for Ciel as they went through this was brilliant. As someone who has seen a lot of musicals and have been in some myself in high school, I am always incredibly interested in how productions do what they do, and that includes costume changes. I don't know why, but I love trying to figure out when and how, looking to see if an actor is wearing parts of a costume under another to allow for a quicker change, or making note of when an actor leaves the stage and comes back in a new costume. I do the same thing with movies. I really enjoy deconstructing the magic. It's so fun to learn. And I also enjoy learning about the behind the scenes for amusement parks as well. I'm just really fun to be around. One last thing. Undertaker has had the same actor for every musical thus far, up until the Weston one. And he kills it. He is really good at the comedic aspect of the character, but when it came time to be more serious during Undertaker's more serious role in the Tango and the Campaignia, he killed it. He did great. So that was cool. Would I watch it again? Absolutely. Have I already said that for this section? I'm not sure. But that's how I'm ending all of these sections. I would absolutely watch this again. I think it's fun. Really good. You should watch it too. We're finally talking about the Weston musical, The Secret of the Public School. First things first. I did not have access to subtitles. However, it is my favorite arc in the manga, and I'm very familiar with the story, so I just kind of dived in. The set for this musical is one of the cooler things I've ever seen, aside from, like, the circus musical and the rotating stage in Hamilton. As far as musicals go, though, like... It's fine. Its set is really the best thing about it, which, don't get me wrong, it is a fantastic set. That is very high praise. It's just, this musical is very dialogue and exposition heavy. And again, I didn't have access to subtitles. I've read a couple reviews from people who understand Japanese, and they agree. It is very exposition heavy. There is a lot of information being thrown at the audiences, and it's also a bit repetitive. The repetitive part I couldn't really speak on because, again, I don't fully understand Japanese, so I wasn't really paying attention to what they were saying. I was just looking at all the sights, taking it all in, enjoying the vibes, if you will.
もう少しモーリスの動きが知りたい。レッドハウスの中に一人動かせる駒がいるな。デリックがいた寮でもあるし。しかし、また力ずくで欠員を作るのはおすすめできかねます。さすがにこう頻繁では。わかってる。
Anyway, I did think the music was fun. There's some really cute and humorous scenes as well that I absolutely love. Like the scene where Sebastian is, I think, gossiping with the Sapphire Owl boys.
行ったか？
まだ行ってない。
ずっと見てるか？
ずっと見てる。
目で見てるか膝小僧で見てるか？
どっちかというと膝小僧。いや目。
目か。行ったか？
行っちゃった。
いやー、やっぱ楽しいな。見られたら怒られちゃうけど。この時間をずっと続けていたいよ。
ミカエリス先生
Also, the way this musical handled getting the audience up to speed on all they need to know to understand the Weston story was genuinely so cool. Like, easily best part of the whole musical. But it was just like a really cool scene. The production team for these musicals literally never miss when it comes to utilizing the projections to enhance the stage and the story being told. It was honestly so good. And I wish I could just show you the whole unedited thing because it's so cool. But alas, copyright. So I'll show you a little bit.
女王陛下へのご報告は低俗で醜悪なケツはこの番犬が始末したかしこまりました主人の邪魔をしないでいただけますか
One important thing to note about this musical is that Furukawa Yuta is replaced. We get a new Sebastian actor, Toshiki Tateshi, I believe is how you say that. Toshiki Tateshi. He really played into Sebastian being a pretty boy. And honestly, like, it was really fun to watch him on stage because he had this air of feeling like he was hot shit. And it's just nice to watch someone who seems to feel so good about themselves. Yes, this is a very big difference from Yuta's complex and monstrous Sebastian, and I do have to admit I prefer Yuta's portrayal of this character, but I think Tateshi did fine. He had an idea of what Sebastian's character is like, and he acted on it. I've also read some reviews from someone who does speak Japanese, as I said earlier, and they said that Tateshi's Sebastian was more of a fanboy for CL, which is a choice. However, some of that was lost on me since, again, I didn't understand the dialogue. I will say, though, that Sebastian was a lot more hands-on with CL in this musical. And I did read that as him trying to annoy CL, though, but that's just my own personal interpretations of these characters, which aren't entirely accurate to what is intended to be read with the portrayals in the musical. Especially with how eager Sebastian was to help out. But regardless of intention, we do have to admit that Sub-CL being the most well-known and one of the most popular ships in the fandom, that's the lens that most people will see some of these choices through, whether that's in a critical light or through their own enjoyment. So it's really hard for me to say if the Sub-CL stuff is intended, purely coincidental, or if we're all just delusional, you know? I have no idea. I'm not in the writing room for these, so that's fun. In this musical, CL is played by an adult actor, which has literally never happened before ever in these musicals. He is usually played by a teenager or younger, and honestly, this CL was really fun, and he really leaned into how weird and freaky CL kind of is. I've read that some have really disliked CL in the musical, and didn't enjoy his acting, which I can see why. He was a bit much, especially since in this story arc, CL spends a lot of it putting on a fake persona. He's trying to work his way into the prefix circle, and watching that play out with real actors, and an adult one at that, can be off-putting. He also chose to portray CL as constantly stressed out, which I thought was funny. I love CL, but seeing him like this over dealing with some low-stakes schoolboy shenanigans is just, the contrast is so funny. So, CL actor, laying on the freakiness a little bit too much. And when I say freaky, I mean CL being weird, just a weird 13-year-old boy, I don't mean anything by that. I like making fun of him. I will say, they do have contacts for the CL actor. And I understand now the memes about how people with blue eyes are scary and unsettling. The cricket part was kind of boring, though. A quick little recap for people who may be watching this video that don't know the Weston arc. It's more or less CL goes to a boarding school, and he has to work his way through the ranks, more or less, socially, to figure out what happened to one of the queen's relatives. He's there on an investigation, and so everything in context is important, but out of context, it sounds really wild. So bear with me when I talk about this next section. There's a cricket tournament, and I think the cricket bit in the musical was kind of boring. But that is just because I don't really care about the sports aspect of sports anime all that much, unless it's Haikyuu, because I actually do enjoy volleyball. I do want to say, though, the scene where the Scarlet House players essentially shit themselves due to laxatives, yes, that does happen in the manga. That's a canon thing CL did to people. It was really overdramatic, and I've seen this pointed out as criticism, but I think it's a spot-on adaptation of the scene from the manga, because it really felt like Harcourt was straight up dying when he shit himself in front of everyone on the cricket field. The scene has always been played up to the extreme, and, like, I get it can be kind of odd watching a group of essentially grown men scream and writhe around on a stage, and it doesn't work as well on the stage, but I think it matches the vibes of the manga pretty well. My one complaint is it looked like Soma fell victim to the laxatives, but I distinctly remember Soma being safe because he didn't eat the meat pie, or at least Agni replaced his portion because Agni really wanted him to eat his homemade pie instead. So that's fun. Speaking of Soma, his actor in the musical seemed to only have a surface level understanding of the Sunshine Boy, really playing up the loudness and over-the-top characteristics, which was a choice. It didn't bother me too much, but again, I wasn't understanding the words he was saying, and people who do know Japanese have said that his portrayal was kind of horrendous, which is not great acting. Not my words, but a common sentiment I have seen online. Most of the other characters, in my opinion, seem to be pretty close to their manga counterparts. Again, I can't understand the dialogue, so I was mostly going off of vibes, but no one stuck out to me as being wrong or just off the way Soma did, if that makes any sense. And it could just be because I'm more familiar with Soma as a character because we spend more time with him. But this is also my favorite manga arc, so I know these boys pretty well. Despite all the flaws, there were some really cool scenes throughout. I really loved seeing some of the cool scenes of the manga be brought to life. For example, towards the end at the midnight tea party, when we figure out what all is going on and what happened to Derek Arden. I've also just heard people say Derek Arden, the actor who played that character, was just one of the better actors in the whole musical. So that could be a factor, but it was just really cool. The musical is the first, and until the new season of the anime comes out, only adaptation of the Western arc we have. So I might be a little biased, but it was really cool seeing my favorite story arc be brought to life, even if it was like kind of mid. My only complaint is that I don't see myself listening to the songs on repeat like I used to with the older musicals. So I think once the anime comes out, I might feel differently because I'm not going to be starving for content. All in all, I think the Western musical was still a pretty fun spectacle. Would I watch it again? Probably. It's my favorite arc, so I'm willing to look past some of the flaws to enjoy the story being brought to life. And also, I have some IRLs that are like kind of interested in watching the musicals, which means I'm probably going to rewatch all of them anyway. I'd say if you're familiar with the Western arc, though, it is worth the watch, but only if you're already familiar with the arc or speak Japanese, since it is not subtitled, at least not that I know of at the time of recording this. And again, there is just a lot of exposition to slog through, so good luck. I would watch it if I were you. What a great sell. Alright, now that we've gone through the musicals individually, I've got some thoughts on KuroMyu overall. But before we get into them, I do want to mention a couple actors that have reprised their roles in every single musical where applicable, aside for a couple of them, but we'll see. Urahara Takuya is literally the perfect Grell. This actor embodies the character so well that I'm like, I don't know how to refer to them. I don't know their pronouns. I don't know this person. Either way, Takuya really seems to understand Grell, and I'd say knows Grell better than most. And I also feel that there's a great level of respect and admiration for the character in the actor's portrayal, which is really nice. The musicals themselves take a pretty canon-typical approach to Grell as a comedic relief character and her gender identity as a joke, which is kind of disappointing, but it is nice to see an actor that doesn't seem to try to lean in to her femininity as a joke and instead has this level of sincerity. At least that's what I get when I watch Takuya on stage. I do hope that this actor continues to reprise the role if there are more musical adaptations or reruns that include Grell's character. They're so iconic. They're literally Grell. It's so good. Izumi Shuhei also played Undertaker in every musical except Weston. So he was there from Friendship all the way up through Tango. But he's absolutely killed it. He always seems like he's having such a great time, and once it became time for Undertaker to be more serious, he was right there delivering the perfect performance. He's got the mix of silly and menacing down perfectly, and it was always just really fun watching him on stage. I'm really sad they replaced him in the Weston one, but I've heard that the Weston one was put on through a different company or something like that, so that is why all of the characters were recast. I'm pretty sure. So, some little bookkeeping behind the scenes reasons as to why we lost our precious cast, but that's okay. That's okay. Okay, so we need to talk about Viscount of Druitt. He wasn't played by the same actor in every single play, but from the 2013 Most Beautiful Death rerun and onward, the Viscount was played by Sasaki Yoshihide, and he does wonderfully. I dislike the Viscount as a character, but I believe that Yoshihide does a great job of balancing the character's comedic relief role and his horrific nature. His portrayal is very flamboyant, yet wet cat-like. The Viscount is often reduced to comedic relief in the manga and anime, and I believe this reduction of his character does make him come off more like a wet paper bag at times. It declaws him, essentially. Like in Tango on the Campaignia. He's a villain, yes, but the impact of his bite is removed by the fact that he is more often than not played for jokes. However, despite all of this, Yoshihide has managed to portray the twisted and perverse nature of this character in equal balance. And he has a great stage presence, making the character really engaging to watch, so that's pretty cool. The musicals themselves are really fun to watch, generally. There are some issues, like canon-typical transphobia or weird Sebastiel bait here and there. I don't care how you feel about the ship, but regardless of how you look at it, it is weird to have real kids and teenagers act out certain scenes that are meant to be in a sexual light to some degree, especially with adults. Like the corset scene, for example, which it was actually left out of the Lycoris musical, despite that being the one musical where it would have been maybe not appropriate, but it wouldn't have been weird to include. Well, it would have been weird, but basically what I'm trying to say, that's where the corset scene lies in canon. So I don't think anyone would have been like, ugh, why'd they do this? Because that's just where it originated from. And also on the topic of Sebastiel, it appears that Yuta took great care in making sure his interactions with the Ciel actors couldn't be read in that light, even making sure Ciel is held at arm's length during scenes that were initially bait-ish in the manga, like Ciel's asthma attack from the Book of Circus, and I think there's a scene in the luxury liner arc where Sebastian is teaching Ciel how to dance, or they're like having to dance. Arm's length. They're like, does not want to touch that child, which is good. He also allowed for the actress of Beast to hold more power in the Beast seduction scene. He just seems like a really respectful guy. Now, some of this could be down to the director of the musicals. Again, I've not really watched interviews. I'm not in these production meetings or anything. I don't know behind the scenes. But Yuta does get a lot of credit for these differences, and I do think he probably did have some kind of say in it. He seems really, really kind with the child actors. And I feel like that should be expected of people. So, like, it's kind of sad that we have to be like, yeah, that person doesn't hate children and treats them with respect and also like children. But, I don't know. It's nice. Aside from the flaws, the musicals tend to add a bit more depth to many of the characters. And it is really refreshing to see so much love and care be poured into these characters that aren't Ciel and Sebastian. And I'm always down to see a character get expanded on. And I think the character that benefits the most from this, I know I had a moment about Madame Red earlier, but Aberline has, like, zero depth in the manga. He's just kind of there. Like, we get to know him a little bit, but he's more of a tool in the manga than a character, if that makes any sense. And in the musical, he is, again, part of why Aberline is the way he is in the musical is because in the very first one, they casted a comedy actor to play him, and he really, like, played up the character and made all these bits, and they were just so iconic. And while it is a joke, it's still so much more depth to this character. Like, I realized when I was reading Book of Circus for the deep dive video, the only reason I love Aberline so much is just because of the musical. I didn't really care about him in the anime. He's hardly in the manga, but he's one of my favorites because of the musicals. So that's kind of fun. But swinging back to Ciel and Sebastian, I absolutely love Yuta's portrayal of Sebastian as just a little creature who's fed up with Ciel. His disdain and annoyance is clear as day, but only to the audience. It's really funny and an aspect of Sebastian's character that I think is really there but often overlooked and obviously covered up because it wouldn't really be appropriate for a butler to be like, wow, what a shithead. Can't wait to get rid of you. You're gonna make those decisions? Okay. And while Sebastian does kind of do that to Ciel, it's not very often. All in all, the musicals are for the most part really good, and if you have the chance, you should watch all of them for yourselves, especially if you enjoy musical theater. Anyway, Aberline and Sharp Hanks as a duo hard carries the musicals even though they don't need carrying. And I think that's all I have to say about this. Thank you guys so much for watching this video about KuroMyu. If you enjoy the Black Butler musicals, let me know which one's your favorite. What do you like about them? Have you seen any of them? I think they're great. What do you think? If you've not seen any of the musicals after watching this video, are you inclined to watch them? If you can get your hands on them? If so, I'd like to know. I would like to know. Anyway, that's it for me. I'll see you all in the next video, which may or may not be Black Butler related. I think I might take a look at something else that Yana Toboso has written. I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye!